welcome. My name is Krishma War. We're going to be chatting today about activities and exercise for sensitive dogs. And I'm hopefully going to be joined by my lovely friend, Liza Radar from Focus Dogs. And we'll hopefully oh my god, I was really not thinking it was going to work. Yay, Liza's here. Hello.
It's so buggy these days. Okay.
Listen, Meta, what can we expect, you know? Uh, we shouldn't badmouth them on their own platform, but anyway, we did it. Welcome, my love. So folks who don't know Liza, Liza is one of my favorite dog people on the internet, and Liza immediately sprung to mind for me today because this coming month, May, for us at CCA, it's all about activities and exercise and schedules and all of that, especially for sensitive, big feeling, high needs dogs. And immediately I was like, Liza, will you just kick us off this month? I know it's just the end of April, but I figured why not just get this in? We can kick off the month talking about, I thought exercise would be the right sort of focus area for you today. That makes sense?
Yeah, totally. This is my jam. So I work primarily with very intense sporting dogs, so very high exercise and movement needs. And this can be very challenging to meet in our like urban and suburban homes. And the results when it's either just like not enough, but also often just the wrong type of thing can be an increase, worsening, or even just like production of behavior problems. So it's often one of the first things that I work on with people. We do a whole like exercise audit and get into, speaking of, my like very bored duck killer is like watching and trying to find something to retrieve for me so he can tell me that he'd like to go for a walk or where. We do a whole exercise audit with people and go through like what exactly are they doing? Where can we put the effort that they're already putting in, which is usually significant, and get them a better result out of that? Are there things we can cut or change to sort of help them have a dog who's easier to live with and have the dog be more comfortable and happy?
Literally, I think that people get so surprised when they come to me or you, I imagine, to work with cases like, you know, separation anxiety, reactivity, sound sensitivity, FOMO, confinement, frustration, all of these issues. And we go, tell me what you do in a week. And literally I ask like an exercise audit. I do like an activity audit where I want to know everything that dog does on like a general day or over a week. And I'm not even touching often like training things at the beginning before I've actually got to this foundational piece. Otherwise, like you're saying, if you're doing the exercise and activity stuff wrong, you could be creating problems or worsening problems that you're then trying to train away, and it's a loop that's never ending and frustrating.
It is, and it can just, man, it can make things really, really bad. It can make things like genuinely unworkable if the dog's needs aren't being met. And we kind of, I think, we've got a weird culture around exercise or for ourselves. We've got a lot of things like weird little aphorisms in the dog world, like, a tired dog is a good dog, and then no, that's bad, and like, but you can just give them, 15 minutes of sniffing instead of an hour walk, like on and on and on. And then this is really complicated and really confusing for pet guardians. And there are certainly times where a situation has just been unworkable because the dog couldn't get enough movement for them to be mentally well.
Yeah.
And it's a really nice entry point because it's a lot, I won't say easy, but simple compared to something like back pain, right? Knee pain. Right. And it's something that we can really tweak and customize quite quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I'm often going to guardians at the beginning, like, just go with me on this. We're going to make these small changes. And often actually it's really quite hard for folks because these high needs dogs, these sensitive dogs, it's often, there's a lot of restrictions placed on their lives already. There's a lot of accommodations and lengths that we have to go to as guardians to get their needs met. And then when we come in and go, oh, actually, we're going to change this, or you can't walk there anymore, you have to do this like this, it can be kind of a challenge sometimes. That's why, like, sometimes
hugely challenging.
Yeah.
This is actually, like, I know we're talking about dogs who already exist in homes, but like, if you were looking for a dog, if you're trying to buy a dog, and you're like, well, I could meet an Aussie's needs. Can you meet an Aussie's needs if something went wrong?
Yes. Oh, that is so huge. Like, I remember getting a poo, and this is actually a brilliant starting point, actually, because first, before we even talk about like what we should be doing for these guys as exercise, I think just addressing that we have a real misunderstanding about how much these dogs actually need. So I thought 8 years ago that I could keep a poodle in Manhattan as like a as someone
right?
who wasn't super wealthy, as someone who didn't have a holiday home in the Catskills, as someone who didn't have a car. And what I didn't prepare for is, what if he is anxious, reactive, injured, unwell? I didn't realize I could maybe, if everything went perfectly, just about meet his needs in Manhattan and Brooklyn. But if anything goes wrong, I can't. And that's an important just like place to remind everyone that, like, often my clients are in urban, suburban environments with highly tenacious, high needs dogs who have then serious behavior challenges. And it's hard, but sometimes I've had clients where I go, we're not even going to touch training. We're going to spend like a whole month just focusing on getting this dog's activity schedule down. And I promise you will have a different dog at the end of that month. And then we start working on these other areas of the framework. And I think just starting off, doubling down on this point that we're always working within a framework. And so we're just talking about like one tiny piece of it.
And this is a big part of, like, I know you and I both look to a lot of things outside of dog training as inspiration. One of those being like trauma therapy, the dogs that we tend to get.
Yeah.
And this is part of the first major step of trauma therapy, which is stabilization. Making sure everybody's needs are met, everybody feels safe, everybody feels comfortable. A great Sarah Strumming-ism from a couple of years ago, I was talking to her about a case that I had that really was, it was unworkable. A dog whose needs could not be met, and there wasn't fixing that with the environment and the situation that was there. And she goes, well, you've been on a plane for like 10 hours. Like, how do you feel? Pretty awful. You haven't been able to move. You've been really cramped. Like, you just feel terrible. No wonder they're acting like this, right?
You've been sick for a week in bed. You can't move, can't get outside, can't do anything. Yeah, there are definitely some moments like that. I met a cattle dog in Manhattan once who was brought from a working farm into Manhattan, into a high-rise building, and I ended up just going, absolutely, this is not reasonable. But most of the time, there's so much that we can do, right? And the first things I usually do when I go in, I do that audit and I go, are there any like red flag activities that could be worsening behavior that I need to like address? And by address, I don't mean immediately cut. I mean just like investigate whether or not they are actually providing like a good fulfillment, enrichment, wellness, like all this stuff, if they're actually providing towards all of that, or if they're just tiring the dog out, essentially. And so I'm often looking at like urban walks on short leashes, because people often do that for like exercise, and then lots of my dogs are in the cities, and they're coming back at the end of those walks and they are completely passing out, but they are not like tired and fulfilled. They're like exhausted and frazzled, and they're on edge. And I always think like it's the difference between spending a day at like the beach, I love the beach, in like the sun, or like a day on an airplane, like Sarah was saying. Like, that's how you feel at the end of those 2 days. That's literally what they're experiencing. And are any other red flags for you that you kind of, for your clients, that you're looking out for especially?
I like, shameless plug, made a whole webinar on this, and
yes,
I have a framework that I'm looking at. We're looking at high intensity, low intensity, physical, and mental. And basically, if any one of those things is missing, so like the dog gets to run really hard, they do like a lot of shuffle mats, they do some obedience training, but they never get to just like dog in nature without sprinting, that's probably a problem.
Yeah.
If the dog is off leash running all the time and you know, gets to go on beautiful decompression walks and gets, you know, really cool chews and mental enrichment and stuff like that, and never gets to problem solve, never gets to think and work cooperatively with their handler, also probably a problem. And then we can look at like every kind of little thing they're doing and going, where would we put this? How might this function for them? We're always kind of assuming and guessing, but like educated guesses. And then I start testing things out. So if we take away, you know, going to the dog park, what happened?
Yeah.
And then inevitably like, oh yeah, we didn't go to the dog park for 10 days and then we went because it was like the one day when everything went wrong. We just had to do something with the dog. And then sure enough, he screamed for 8 hours afterwards. Like, cool, good to know. Thanks for telling us. Now we know that that's a problem. We won't do it again. But then I'm also really looking at what happens after. So like you mentioned, they come home and they pass out. A lot of the dogs that I work with tend to come home and go have zoomies or go ballistic. They can't stop at all. You know, okay, why? So the thing I was going to say, we're always going to ask why, and then we're going to ask why, and then we're going to ask why, right? So why, you know, what's the function of what we're doing? Why did we do it? What was the result? Why was that the result? Why?
Yeah. Yes.
And there's lots of things we can do, and it really depends on the dog. Like it might be so simple as like they just need to have a chew when they come home. They just don't know yet that they can calm down, and that's a good idea. So you just pop them in a pen, give them a chew, and then they're good. They just need to do that for a few weeks, and they sort it out. They figure it out. Or it might be like, no, we really cannot do this kind of exercise. We need to find something else.
Yeah, we need to rehaul sometimes, and sometimes we can make these. I'm always looking for the smallest adjustment, the simplest, the easiest adjustment that has the biggest payoff for the Guardian. So I'm not going to rehaul everything if I don't absolutely have to. But the thing that I'm going to point, I like wanted to zoom in on there is that like I came in going, what are some red flag activities or things that you kind of question whether they're beneficial or not? And I think it's really smart that you actually drew attention to the fact that it's not the individual things that are the problem. It's not the, are you playing like this? Are you walking like this, etc. It's the balance. It's the whole picture of the dog's life. Yeah.
And there are things that are going to trend. Like I'm always suspicious if we're playing chuck it. I'm like,
always. If there's like a Nerf chuck it gun, those gun things, or like a flop, what are they called? Yeah, chuck it launcher.
Yeah, like that. Enough of the time it's made a problem. Not always. So it's worth a look, right? So we're also never going to assume, even though we might have something that trends to be a problem, we're never going to assume that it is.
Absolutely.
And then we're always looking again at the balance of what happens after and what happens before. So if we have, like I have a dog in my program right now who we just learned he doesn't want to go for a neighborhood walk because what happened, as often does with the dogs that I work with, they're so overwhelmed and busy and frenetic, and the stress tends to come out as sort of being gregarious and maybe like a little bit more reactive than shut down, like just hyper, that kind of vibe.
They get big. They get big or they get small.
Big and busy.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot of work to reduce his overall arousal. And then all of a sudden he just was like, I don't want to leave the front yard.
I see. Yeah. Because he started to actually.
Oh, you were scared. Okay, thanks for telling us. Right, you don't have to do that anymore. Good to know. Whereas before you really wouldn't have seen that because he was like, let's go, we better go, right? And you go, okay, you don't have to do that. So what else are we gonna do?
Okay. Yeah.
We need that. Can we fix that? Right? Why doesn't he want to do it? And then how do we work on that if that's necessary? And then what else are we gonna do instead?
Yeah.
Do we need to do something instead?
Yeah, definitely. I love so back to the shameless plug, Liza has this amazing webinar. Please everyone go click through the link in their bio and watch it. What's it called again?
It's called Understanding Exercise.
Understanding Exercise, yes. And you split it up into this way that's so brilliant, because exercise, I used to think of, you know, like you have high arousal activities and lower arousal activities, but you've kind of created this further level of nuance, which is is it mental versus
physical?
Yeah, physical, which I think is amazing, because I didn't really think about the low arousal, like the lower arousal. I think often people get stuck in one or two of those different things. So either my dog's always walking and sniffing slowly, or they're always chasing a ball. I got stuck in the always chasing a ball, always training, always up, always like using his brain and body in this really high arousal way. And when I started to learn more about my poodle's activity schedule, I started to go, oh, okay, so you already come installed with like an accelerator. I need to really work on the low arousal, like mental and things, so problem solving slowly and mindfully, and using your body in a slow and mindful way. So for Hera, I've done lots of searching games, which can be quite high arousal, but I try to do like lower arousal searchy stuff. And then I've also done like lots of physio type things, which are very thoughtful and slow, and he has to think about when.
Can you talk to Visca about this, please?
Me and Hera have been working on this for a good 6 months to get him to think about his body. It's taken him a long time. He's finally just thinking, but I would never have been able to do that with him before, and it showed in his behavior as well, because when he was able to do these lower arousal things and think and use his body, it trickles down into the behavior. Yeah,
because it feels good to be calm, right? Mm-hmm. You get more of it. It starts to reinforce itself. The thing that I get often is dogs who are frenetic and hyper and reactive and borderline aggressive in a lot of cases. They have been doing a lot of work to get the dog to calm down. And the nature of who they are as a person, this dog, like, oh, actually, you need to go really hard in these places. So we can put that in a clear container. This is where you are allowed to go hard and party. You're allowed to really, really push yourself, but we're not going to do that here.
Yes.
And that outlet is a necessity for them. So we can go too far in either direction. Mm-hmm. And, if we have a dog who's designed to be explosive, to go hard, to work all day, right, push their body, you can't turn them off. The most effective thing to do is give them a clear container for that. Here's where that's allowed to happen. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's how you get to do it. And then elsewhere you're not. Elsewhere we're going to do other things.
Yeah.
I went through a whole injury thing with Biscuit over the winter, and my God, when he was not able to do field work, he's not a happy cookie. By extension, no one else was.
Yeah. It's absolutely. You're saying that, and I was thinking about how with Hera's like, he's a poodle, he's a pet poodle, but I really worked to make him feel really, really, really big feelings about his reinforcers and his toys and his food and his training, and that really bit me in the ass when he couldn't just stop. Like, he could never turn off. So in the house, he was constantly trying to solicit play from me, constantly in a cycle of like kind of barking at something, then coming back to me, and then I'd train a little bit, and then he'd bark at a noise, and then I'd train him, and then he'd try and hide the ball under the couch, and so I'd get it. And on walks, he'd be, either trying to get me to play with him all the time. He wasn't able to go and sniff and just be a dog. He was always trying to solicit something from me, trying to get like attention, play, make something happen. And it went so far as, he started attacking other dogs to get me to recall him and throw him a frisbee and things like that. That's this guy. And that's an example to me of not having a container for him to put his brains and his body and his big movement and his problem solving. Once I solved that problem, I made it very clear to him, this is where we do the zippy zappy stuff. And other than that, when I say cut it out, be a dog, because there's nothing in this for you. When I got that clear for him, and then I created that balance with clarity around when the different things happened, that's when I started to see him learn to really regulate himself and get his needs met properly.
Totally. And it can be really hard for those of us who really care, and for those of us who have really sensitive dogs, to step in there and then go, okay, so this thing that you're doing isn't going to work, and you need to do a different thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That can be a really hard rhetorical shift for us. It can be a really hard emotional thing to do for us, but it's also really important if we have these dogs who are like exploding to get more explosion. I say, like, it might be really important for them to really go hard and fast, but also if they're dragging you into the field, if they're screaming at you to throw the toy, that's going to show up elsewhere. So we're looking for, how are they able to access it? Because like you said, I'm going to go and mess with someone so my human comes in and does something interesting.
So bad. He would literally, we would be walking in like a long grass area, and so he'd be interested in sniffing. And if we walked through a mowed field, he'd start looking. He'd say, "This is fucking boring." And then he'd look at me, and he'd try and get me to do something. And then if I didn't, he'd look at the little Shih Tzu, and then he'd fucking go for him. And literally, I watched it happening. I went, "How is this? How did I make this happen?" And I realized that, well, of course, because that would happen, and then I'd jump in with a flurry of management, you know. And
Yes.
I taught him that he could access this really reinforcing high arousal and also high physical, it was like high arousal, high physical, like meant like movement. It was all the best things for him happened as a result of all the unwanted.
So I'm currently beta testing a class with Sarah Strumming on what we call Slow School, which I know you know all about. It's a gorgeous program. It's very exciting. And one of the things that we work on is asking them in smaller moments. So we're not going to ask them to not attack the Shih Tzu if that's what they've been practicing, but in smaller moments at first, asking them to feel that tension in their body and make a different choice. Instead of hitting, being on the end of the leash and just going like, I'm on the end of the leash. Now my head's going to come and I'm going to push and I'm going to look for something to get into. You feel that leash pressure. Can your head come down? Can you sit on the ground? Can you take a breath?
Yeah.
And that, finding those little moments to start asking for those shifts is really, really important.
Yeah.
But part of that is, I'm actually not going to let you explode and stuff. I'm not going to feed you through it. But also, like, we are now going to be moving away from that because I can see that you can handle it. So I talk a lot about like, when is a mom management mode?
Yeah.
And also, we don't manage toddlers by having a whole conversation with them with snacks.
Yeah.
And carry them out of the store. So thank you so much for telling me you can't handle this. We're going to go to what you can, and then we'll work on it there. But I'm not sitting down on the grocery store floor and bringing out the snacks to the toddler who's screaming and crying, because that's actually not an emotionally safe thing to do.
Well, no, I also, I don't want to be unclear with you, screaming and crying and flailing doesn't make the good things happen. And like for Hira, he is an interesting case because he is quite tenacious in his own way, which I then, bolstered myself. And then on top of that, he massively lacks resilience. So if he has bad experiences, he can really crumble, and he has a history of really not being able to tolerate me saying no, me restraining him, me physically removing him. I've worked, and part of our work is we work to have these dogs able to tolerate that. Now he's more resilient. Now when he sees the Shih Tzu and gets excited and wants to go and bite the Shih Tzu to make something good happen, I see it, I don't let it happen. I have a lead on him, I have a lead on the Shih Tzu, everyone has a lead on them, and if you try, I'm immediately moving you away, saying absolutely not, that's not going to work, try something else. When I see anything better, that's when the interactions happen. So like the other day, social interaction was what he wanted. He wanted to say hi to his aunt, and he was being a complete psycho, weren't you? And I literally just made all the dogs stand there for like 5 minutes until everything came down, and then they got the really fun thing of everyone interacting. And that's the same for this exercise. Like if your dogs are going into the park and barking and screaming and spinning and losing their minds, and then you play that game with them, we know what's happening, right? We know what's going to happen there.
And it starts to show up other places as well.
Yeah.
Maybe not in that exact form, but that emotional dysregulation does. Absolutely. And regulation is not about good emotion, bad emotion, or good behavior, bad behavior. It's about flexibility within that and appropriateness for the situation.
Yes, absolutely.
Screaming and melting down because I have a toy in my hand is actually not appropriate for the situation. No. And being unable to switch out of that state, also not safe, right? So it's about moving up and down. That's a big part of what we teach in Slow School. And I'm always kind of thinking, we know in people, when we have a big angry outburst or we like really angrily vent to a friend, it makes us feel a little bit better in the moment. It does not make us feel better about that situation long term. What it does is make us more likely to have an angry outburst in the future. And the same thing is true for these big explosions. And I will also say the same thing is true for running and hiding under the bed.
I see this to my clients all the time. Like, we talk about management, right? We're not just trying to reduce barky, lungy, growly behaviors. We're trying to reduce all flavors that are inappropriate reactions to the current situation, and whether that be shutting down and doing nothing.
Yeah.
It might not be as inappropriate. It might not be as inconvenient as biting. It's just as detrimental to the animal. And the same thing for frustration and rage, kind of related behaviors. If I have a dog who's so mad that they're flinging themselves at the wall and biting at me, I'm going to make huge adjustments to reduce that as much as possible. And in their activity schedule, I'm not going to let them practice that. I'm not going to, within their exercise, build all of that in to their exercise. That is just, yeah, a recipe for disaster, when we'll get them going to rage, going to frustration much, much faster, and directed towards other things than just toys. Yeah.
Totally. And I think also, like, we get very anxious as dog people because we think, if they reacted once, we've sunk the ship. Or if they scream for this toy, they're going to scream forevermore, or whatever. The thing that I'm also kind of looking at is duration of those things. So, we flip out about the toy for a second, and then we're able to go and sniff. That's really different than the dog who melts down for 20 minutes, right?
Absolutely. Sometimes that's the best you're going to get, to be honest, at the beginning. Something like that's the mark of success.
Are we trending in the right direction? And are we shifting really quickly? I had a really lovely moment with my puppy Hutch, who has a little frisbee, and he's normal. He's allowed to chase toys, which is amazing. It's very new for me. And he loves his little frisbee. It's great. I wanted to start working on a game that I play in my other webinar about toy play, where basically, like, the toy is wallpaper. And because I want them to learn, again, how do you get access to the toy? You don't get access to the toy by pushing at me and jumping and flailing. I pull it out of my pocket at a sniff spot, and immediately he jumps up in my face and, like, air snaps past me. Ooh, that was interesting. And he jumps up and snaps, and then he jumps, and then he jumps, and then he was fine. The reason why I knew that was workable is because within the first couple of seconds, the behavior changed.
Yeah.
So the first jump was a really explosive eye level air snap. And then the next one, he was like, hi. And then he went past me. And then he jumped lower. And then his head dipped.
Yeah.
And then he trotted a little bit and circled back and jumped again. And then he trotted a little bit more, and then he sniffed, and then he kept moving. So it was really, really, really fast. So one of the things we're looking at when we're trying to figure out, is something working? Is this activity okay? Is how does it shift in those micro moments? Like, we should see changes of downshifting, if that's what we're looking for, within seconds. If the thing we're doing works.
Yep.
And that's like really useful, because, like, that's the kind of thing I don't like. Kind of, well, I get, because of who I am as a person, what my program is, it's like I get a lot of people who, like, they care so much. They've done a lot of dog training.
Yeah, I bet.
And I always kind of have to tell them, like, it's not actually your job to be a dog trainer.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to know it. Right? So that's the kind of thing where, like, I don't expect pet guardians to know how to do that, but, like, that's the kind of thing you and I are looking at, those little micro moments of, like, are we moving in the right direction really quickly? Am I getting what I want really fast, even though it doesn't look perfect yet?
But that's what our job is, right? Like, most of the time, guardians come to me and their dog's having a meltdown for 5 minutes and having to get taken home, and they're not able to recover. And then the next time we make some adjustments, the meltdown lasts 4 minutes, and then they're able to sniff and eat some food. Lots of people would look at that and go, damn, are we messing this up? And we are able to look from the outside and let you know, within the big picture, is that actually a success marker? And we keep going. So, like, our Staffy pig is a great example. Like, we'd take him out to, like, decompress at the beginning, and he would be unable to do that, and he would be, really frustrated at the end of the leash, huffing and puffing and because he wants to get to everything, get to hear the other dogs, other people. And it was over about a year that he went from that to complete soft body, soft face, nose breathing, can watch dogs running and playing and just go and sniff and regulate himself. And those changes happen so slowly, like grass growing, like paint drying. You don't see it happening. Our job is to see it happening, right? Like that's all we can do.
Totally. And that, I mean, I always hope that I can like absolve a little bit of the mental load of living with a really sensitive dog by kind of stepping in and doing some of the stuff. Like, here's how we're going to curate the activities that we're doing. You know, this part of it is like not actually your problem. You don't have to think about that.
Exactly.
Man, it's taxing, which is one of the reasons why we start with the activities, because this is the stuff you're doing with the dog most of the time. And if it's all a nightmare, then you're going to burn out, and I can't have you burning out. Mm-hmm. That's not cool. So what are we going to do to make it easier? Yeah. And that's always a red flag for me when I'm looking at, like, I will often do consults with other trainers and stuff like that. And if I see that we're not assessing what the actual life, like day-to-day life that the dog is like, that always concerns me, because I am really worried about like the mental health of the guardian when we're dealing with these really sensitive cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. It's honestly like, I've definitely seen cases where, you know, people have been working for years, but no one's ever really just gone to this foundation and laid the solid foundation for them. And so they're always on this rocky, unstable kind of footing. And it can go so wrong. I think my main takeaways from today are just how important this is, and like where it fits into the order of operations when we have these very sensitive, high needs dogs. And then secondly, this kind of shift to thinking of the whole activity schedule as like a system, and how we create balance, where the dog is more likely to gravitate naturally. Is it the high arousal, the low arousal? Is it the mental? Is it the movement? And then like helping them spread out the different types of exercise and stuff that they do to be not just one type of thing over and over again, or just two things on kind of on rotation over and over again.
Totally. And just the nuance therein. Like, there's no one perfect way. Mm-hmm. And then also there's a million variations of the same thing. And so micro shifts can make a massive, massive difference.
Absolutely. Those micro shifts are key for me, because like when I work with a lot of, I know you do as well, a lot of like neurodivergent folks who are holding a whole bunch at the same time, and it's already a bit overwhelming. And so what they really need is for us to be like, this week you're doing this one thing, and then check in and be like, and how you done this one thing? How's it going? Like literally that sometimes can just be, it can be such a danger. I'm going to just recommend everybody goes to Liza's profile and watches the Understanding Exercise webinar. It's really, really fantastic. Honestly, so good. And we're going to be doing a lot of chatting over the next month on this page about activities, more conversations about exercise, but also sort of the larger sort of different things that you can do with your dog. Some things not to do with like exercise and movement. So stick around, and I want to say a big thank you to Liza for joining us today and telling us. Yeah, this was so fun. And as always, everyone who doesn't follow Liza, please go and follow them, because they're rockstar. And you can also go check out Slow School as well. If anyone is interested, you can just go to Liza's profile. I'm sure you'll find stuff there.
And like the real thing is going to be coming soon. I don't know when, but soon.
Soon. Okay, we'll wait for that drop. All right, thank you, my love. Have a lovely day. Cheers for hanging out with us today. Thanks to everyone who joined. I'll see you soon, love. Bye.